I've been going to this church since about 1946. I started going to church when my wife was going to this church. I had been going to this church a long time. And it was right up there in Barrett for quite a while, and they moved the old church down here. And then Carl Craig was a builder, and he put the old church back together and then added to it. And then we built that addition to the church. And we were married in this church in 1947. That's about all I've got to say about the church.
Bessie Aside.
And how long have you been going to this church?
Ever since 1945. See a lot of changes, especially the people have changed a lot. Because I'm 89 now.
Think about it.
Oh, I don't think there's much change. It's improved a lot.
You've been involved in Happy Hands, right?
Yeah, we've been involved in Happy Hands.
How long has Happy Hands been going?
Oh, I can't think of the lady's name. She's in Texas now, but she started in her own home. We were just a small group, and they got larger, and then we started being called Happy Hands.
Anything you want to say?
No, I think this church is great. I'm sorry to see it move.
Yes. It's going to be sad, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Very sad.
Yeah. What was his name?
Reverend Burgoyne?
Okay.
Sherman Burgoyne?
Mm-hmm. Was he here for quite a while?
No, he wasn't. He was only here probably about a year or so. And of course, at that time, you know, Hoderer was. And so
What year was that?
45, or probably 6 or 7 when he moved from here.
47?
He was the one that stood up for the Japanese people.
Oh, I see.
And he was kind of ostracized by the community. So I think that's why he had to move.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Because he allowed the Japanese people to come here?
Well, not because they let him come in, but because they were prejudiced. They were prejudiced against the Japanese.
And what is it that he did that the community didn't like?
I think it's because he was for the Japanese, because we were being, what do you call it?
You were sent to internment camps.
Yes.
And he spoke out against that?
No, yes, he did. And so finally he had to leave, and he was demoted to a smaller church down the valley. And he got the Jefferson Award.
Oh, really?
Yes, he did. And we helped him raise money for that because he was really outstanding person.
Did you go to an internment camp?
Yes, he did.
And
we went in 42.
Okay.
Then when the war was over, then we were able to come back.
Where did you go? Where was the internment camp?
We were in Pinedale, California, and Tule Lake, and then we were sent to Hart Mountain, Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Miss.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm Ruth Turner. I used to be Ruth Frick, and I'm 81 years old. I started at Asbury. My mother enrolled me, and I was baptized here in, I suppose, 1931, the year I was born. So I've had a lot of experiences here at Asbury, being in children's programs, playing hymns for opening exercises for Sunday school, they used to call it. One of the most important and fun things was MYF, the Methodist Youth Fellowship Group. And we had a great time. There were boys and girls, and we got to go places. We went roller skating to Portland one time, went to Coburg's Beach. I think we had a study group too, but I think I remember the fun parts more. The main story is that we used to go to camp at Sutter Lake, and I remember we rode about 10 or 12 of us rode in the back of a flatbed truck from here to Sutter Lake. That was rather interesting. Just had boards around the aside, and we walked around in it and sat and talked and sang, and camp was really a lot of fun. They had classes, and the class I remember most was a class in the Psalms taught by a Rabbi Levine. I took copious notes, and I still have those notes to this day. I really enjoyed it. Then I should mention that my husband and I were married in Asbury in 1950, and Asbury will always be my church home. Well, when I was born, my mother enrolled me in Sunday school. That would be in 1931. When we were married, there was a big room that was not closed off. It went clear up to the ceiling that is up in the attic now, and that was where our wedding reception was.
The organ was just right in the sanctuary. That cross wasn't there.
No, it wasn't. It's interesting. We used to have different ways of kind of hiding the organ, because otherwise you were sitting watching the organist squirm around on the bench, and that was a little distracting. So it ended up we would have a cloth across there, and finally Phil Tyler, I think, and Vanette and Dick Duckwall did the remodeling out there and put up the cross and all the newest parts that are there now. Well, I do remember Reverend Burgoyne that was here when the Japanese came back, and what a struggle he had in the church. Well, I was only about 10, and we weren't here, and we came back in this summer, and the names had been removed from the honor roll, the Japanese names. The Legion had done that, and my mother was very upset, and she quit their membership she had belonged. And when Reverend Burgoyne stood up for the Japanese people, there were a lot of people quit coming to the church. I bet you didn't have 10 or 15 people there on Sunday mornings. And he was pretty well persecuted in the community for doing that. It was a bad time.
How long have you been the piano player?
Well, off and on. I started when I was in high school. I played hymns for Sundays in high school, and then didn't play again until we moved back. I can tell you how I learned to be an accompanist, which I did for a lot of years. But the first time I tried to accompany someone in the choir, who shall remain nameless, I was playing along and she was singing sort of off-key and not very well, and so I just kept playing, paid no attention. She stopped me, she said, "Ruth, the pianist follows the singer, not the singer, the piano." I thought, okay. So I learned my lesson. You follow the music no matter what they do. You just go along. Don't worry about it.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Ruth.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great.
Good. This is Ann Woody, Frances Ann Woody, and my mother, and my name is Susie Horton. And I was born and grew up in this church.
And there's a picture of about 4 or 5 people at a meeting in a corner. And then on the heading it says, was Naomi Foster and Lee Foster, and Jack Woody was one of the 4 or 5 people.
He was they were very much involved in the church. Dad was very much, loved this church, and brought Mom. She came when they got married here, right? Did you get married here, or was it just as a piece?
Right here.
Right here?
What year would that be?
January 48.
There's quite a bit of history. I remember sitting and listening to the services, and beautiful stained glass windows in this church. I just remember them so much, looking at them, and I'd sit and try to pay attention to the sermons, and the boys would usually be writing on something, and invariably somebody would drop a pencil and it would roll all the way to the bottom. And we used to look around and see who was nodding off in the service. But I don't know. There was a lot of history. A lot of history. This is a wonderful church, and I was glad I grew up in it.
I mean, Methodist by osmosis, you see, because I married Jack, and he was definitely, this was his church, so therefore it became my church. We'd be on one side of the room in our certain pew, and Naomi Foster and Lee and their tribe would be opposite of the other big doors, because when you have 5 or 6 kids, you have to have easy access to out. And so they would sit over there, and we would sit over here. And we almost was fixtures, because there we would fill the pew, and so would they. And we would have a good time with it. There was something to do.
So the period that we're talking about here is probably the late 40s through the 60s?
The 50s. And Paul, the youngest, was born 61.
So apparently Jack was involved in the running of the church. I mean, he was in different committees.
He worked with the MIF, full time. Was to get very unhappy with Rachel Fields, if you remember that lady, because there were 3 trustees. You understand, Jack wasn't the only one. But he was the only one, and she called him up every single night. Right as we were sitting down to dinner, Rachel would be on the phone wanting Jack to do something, fix a light bulb, undo something in the bathroom. There was always some little tiny piddly something. So he would have to go down, and he was always very accommodating.
So he was, at least by her, he wasn't a trustee, he was the janitor.
Well, he assumed that, because he was. Officially, the title was trustee, but he did everything. And so, and his funeral was here in the church.
That was the one beautiful thing. I remember
there
that.
were all the Cub Scouts, because he was a Cub Scout leader.
He passed away around the 15th of December in 73.
All the Cub Scouts filled that, where you had the choir loft. Was absolutely stuffed with small young men, because he had been their mentor for several,
When were you born, Ann?
29, July 10th.
The only thing I could think of, and I can't make a very good story out of it, but one time our church went to the beach, the camp at the beach.
Camp Magruder?
Yeah, for a family camp, I think it was, and it was just a lot of fun. And there was a young man that was a kid then, and we were paired off to do some kind of a game or something, and it turned out he was one of Scott and Donna Fitch's sons.
We moved to Hood River in February of 1961. We were renting a little house across the street from a lady by the name of Mildred Cool, who was a member of this church. And we had, in our conversations across the street, she asked if I was affiliated with any church, and I said, well, I grew up a Methodist, and she said, oh, so am I. And so about 2 days later, there was a knock on our back kitchen door, and here was a guy with a buzz-cut hair and shorts and sandals, and he said, I'm the new minister at Asbury Methodist Church. Here you're a Methodist. And we came the next Sunday, and we've been coming ever since.
What year was that?
1961.
Wow.
What was it? Do you remember the pastor's name?
Charles Kerr.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So he was, and he had a young family, and so it was just the fact that he came to my door made a difference, I guess, and we hadn't really started yet, and so, yeah.
Nice.
Good.
He had a real airplane that he flew?
No,
He did model
flew
airplanes.
model airplanes, and anyway, on a Saturday, a group of boys, well, I guess it wasn't just boys, but a group of kids, as I recall, went up into the attic and were exploring. I guess he was with them. But anyway, where the skylight is, David was walking across there and fell through. So we had a different skylight than what we have now. Anyway, that's my memory.
He fell
Did he fall all the way down?
way down.
Oh, no. But I look at that and I just shudder, because he could have, but he straddled a board. So,
Oh, good.
and then that's one of my memories.
Well, that's Wayne Cobus and his model airplanes are what brought us to Asbury.
My name's Tom Hart. I'm 54 years old. I moved from New York to Oregon in the spring of '97, And in December of that year, which is exactly 15 years ago, I moved to Hood River, and the day after I got to town, I checked out the two Methodist churches in the valley, and actually Asbury looked so big and imposing, I thought I might actually go to Odell instead. But I showed up here on December 7th, I think it was, 1997, and I happened to sit on the left rear side of the congregation next to Zelda Stanton and Louetta Scherf. And I must say, it gets really warm in that corner of the church when the radiators kick in. But somehow in that initial conversation, I mentioned to Zelda that I used to walk to choir when I was a kid back in my home church. And so she immediately pointed out Marv Turner and told me who to see to get in the choir. And then at the end of the service, Louetta came up to me and told me there was going to be a potluck and that I was surely invited to come, even though, of course, I didn't have a dish because I'd never walked in the building before. And I explained I had a Christmas party to go to for the Studebaker Club in Portland, so I wouldn't be able to stick around. So I headed out the front door, and as I did, Pastor Charles Chase came running after me to make sure that I had been invited to the potluck. And I assured him that, yes, everybody had been friendly. And I think the church I had attended in Portland the 6 months before I moved out here, nobody had, or at least not as many people had been as friendly as they were in that one first service at Asbury. And, of course, I did show up at choir the following Thursday night and sat next to Irv Tollerud, who was the only bass at that time. So I helped him with the music over the years, and he let me know who was who in the congregation, and we developed a friendship. And he was the one who told me when Ginger Hollingsworth was leaving, and he was the one who told me himself that he didn't think he could quite keep up with choir anymore, so he'd be retiring. And now I sit in the first bass chair in the choir, and I've been here ever since. I feel like this is my family. I got married in this church, and Even my son says this is, if he comes to church, this is his only church home, because this is where everybody knows his name and everybody welcomes him. So I look forward to moving on with the Asbury family.
I'm Marv Turner, and I came to church here. We married here in 1950, 62 years ago this month. And Ruth, my wife, was here. She was born and raised, and she's on a cradle roll here and stuff. And we met in college, and we went away in the service and teaching elsewhere. And then finally we came back in 1961, and that's when I joined the church here. My membership was transferred down from Pendleton Church. There were a lot of changes that have gone on in our building and around the building since. And I was just was thinking about when we were married here, what you see in the back room where all the offices, the pastor's office, and in fact this room, were all part of our social hall. There was no ceiling in there. It went right clear to the roof from it being the old sanctuary, and that was where they had our wedding reception, in fact, was about where the table is in the Izumi room. This whole thing was wide open. At that time, when we were married, they had a rolling wall up the side in where the pastor comes in the office. Those two doors there, that was all rolling walls, and it was used for overflow. They'd put chairs back in where our library area is, and people would, like special occasions, that's where they would sit to see the program was going on. Where the pastor's preaching point, whatever that's called, the pulpit, the organ, the choir loft, that was all redone in about 1961 or 2. Screen in front of the organ and the cross in front of that, the altar rails, that whole front end, the pulpit was all boxed in, and with the doors where you come in from the library, all that was done in about 1962 or 3, because they had closed that off. And all this area over here where it was sealed in, it was in the 50s sometime when that was done. Also, incidentally, the whole basement, which used to be just a walk-through basement to get over to the furnace room, that was all dug out and sealed up and tiled up and the floor put in the kitchen and stuff, and that was in the 1950s sometime. So there were major changes made in what I'd term as the roaring 50s. The ceiling of the old sanctuary here, if you look and climb up the stairs and look up in there, it's all no-knot, #1 grade tongue and groove lumber, which is perfectly beautiful if you get a chance to look up in there at that ceiling in the old one. There's pieces of a chandelier still hanging from the center of that old building. The old part was facing State Street.
Oh, they rotated it.
Yeah, and when they got ready to add the sanctuary, they picked it up and moved it around to face this direction, and then added the sanctuary, and that's with the part that we're dedicating today from 1912 when they finally got that finished. This was opened in the 1950s.
Right, all through the 50s.
And then when they did all that part of it, it was in the 50s sometime when they sealed it up and made the offices up here.
And lowered the ceiling.
Yeah, and lowered the ceilings, right.
So was that done by Carl Craig?
Well, he was the leader, and he had some mighty good helpers that he brought in from his mill. He had all the cabinetry work and all the carpenters on his staff. He brought them in, and the men of the church, as I understand it, and Naomi could tell you more about this, is when they did the social hall, that was just the group of volunteers from the church that did all that by hand, wheeled the dirt across out past where the Sunday school rooms are down below and out over the back end, brought it all down to ground level, put down this tile floor, cement in the tile floor, and boxed in the furnace room and the kitchen and all that stuff. That was in the 50s.
Do any come to mind that are noteworthy, you'd like to say anything about?
Oh boy, you put me on the spot. I think probably the most liked was Ralph Wild and his wife. They made a real joint team. They had been missionaries, brethren, United Brethren missionaries in Brazil, both of them. And when they came back, he carried on that same kind of relationship with the congregation here, and he went visiting and did all that, and was highly respected by everyone. But he only lasted 2 years, and they moved him to a bigger church off in Idaho.
2 years seem more like 6 years to me. But
yeah, well, that's when you came, wasn't it? About yeah. Of course, we became personal friends with the McDonalds, and he was here quite some time before Wild. His wife was very active in the community. She taught, and she was in the choir and that kind of thing. But through the years, I remember that the first woman we had was Barbara Bellisup, and she was very effective. I have appreciated her because she sang tenor in the choir. And we had some other ladies and gentlemen through the years, as far as I was concerned, been very effective and really helped the church go along. Counseled me in a lot of cases. Well, I do remember one thing. Reverend Kobus, I forget what his first name was, Kobus. He was Wayne, right. He was in the 70s. And one thing that he did, and I think it got you started, was had a model airplane club for the kids. But I recall something else, that they were having some kind of a party downstairs, and one of the tricks or the games that they were playing was to the kids feed each other with marshmallows, blindfolded. What no one knew was that he was dipping them in charcoal. And then the kids came out with charcoal all over their faces, and then they took off the blindfolds, and he passed a mirror around, and they were aghast at that. So Christina was an up and coming young lady, very personable, and very instilled with love of God and the relationship between her and God. And she she didn't pull any punches about how she felt about God and what God did for her, which is contagious if that happens that way. I had sung in a choir in Pendleton. That's where I kind of really learned how to read music and all that stuff. And then I came to town, I immediately joined the choir here. And we had, at that time, maybe 20, 22 people. We had nice maroon robes and all that. We had, like, Dick Duckwall was singing with us, and Al Eisenberg, and then we had Vita Corrado was one of the sopranos, and we sang pretty complicated music. And then later on, the choir director left, and we had Polly Coate for a choir director, and she kept about the same numbers. Then she had to go, and so it kind of tapered off. Pat Crompton was director for a couple of years, and she gave that up. And so I figured, well, I've been sitting up here watching people wave their arms, and for 20 years, I ought to be able to do that. So about 1986, there was no one else to do the job, so that's when I took over the choir. The choir loft was used all the time until they did the front end of the church, and we used it then for a choir loft. In the previous, there was just a sloped. There was a ceiling for the downstairs stairway.
Okay.
And so when they redid the front end of the church, they also made that with risers, and that became the choir loft. And we sang there till, 1995, there, middle 90s somewhere. By that time, our numbers were down, and we found out that the choir was singing off toward the organ, and the people out in the congregation weren't able to really hear what we were doing. So we would try turning in the choir loft. Well, that left those basses and those altos way off back against the wall, so that didn't work. So I finally, like I said, probably middle 90s, somewhere in there, we decided, well, we'll just shut that off and not do that. We just sit down with the congregation, get up and go sing and come back. And we've been doing it that way ever since. The greatest thing now in modern times that I have seen in our choir was when we joined with Our Redeemer and brought in twice the number, or the same number we had, double the size of our choir, and we've become a real family. It was a real addition to have those folks come in and start singing with us.
Explain the family part.
Well, it's interpersonal relations that are going on. All of a sudden, because we have music in common, I think, and we've known kind of around. I had some of the kids in school and like that. But as soon as they came in, we melded into a group. The songs we started singing, they contributed because they could read music real well, and they fit right in with our people. And the first thing right off the bat, we were singing, making beautiful harmony with much more of a body to it. And we've gelled into a social group, a real church group that you like to belong to. You're friends with all these folks around. And we put up with each other's weaknesses and strengths, and we just have a good time. Choir practice is a lot of fun now. Not that it wasn't before, but to have all these more people around. So that's been a real boon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm Naomi Foster, and I'm 95 years old. We came to Hood River the day after Thanksgiving in 1949 and moved into Bruno Hukari's house in the Oak Grove area. We had been here perhaps 2 weeks, and then we looked for a church. And of course we were Methodists, so we went to Asbury. And our first Sunday there were very few people, and absolutely no children or young people. And we thought, wow, what's happened here? Come to find out, they were all at family camp. And so we thought, well, that sounds great. At that time, there were 3 Sunday schools. It was one big room and an office. The nursery was an office, the Dorothy Owen room. And the rest of it was just one big room with a pot-bellied stove. And we had 3 Sunday school classes there. And I had a class of little boys, about 10, 12 years old. And usually the attendance was 10 to 14. And it really kept me on my toes to try to keep them happy and interested. But we did things like making scrolls and houses like people would live in and telling stories about those. And the kids very seldom missed Sunday. They would be there. So I had to be prepared. And the first time I went to the women's organization, it was at Mabel Hendricks' house. just up the street from the church. And there were 27 women there. And they had a book review, which was very interesting. And they also had a junior matrons group, which was for the younger women. So I went to that, and it was also a large group and had very interesting programs. And Ruth Avakian, the doctor's wife, was kind of the ringleader there. And so I went to both groups, and I think Nancy Barclay did too. We hadn't been here too long until Barclays came. And our church suppers were in the back part of the basement, and the kitchen was that little tiny room off to the side, and we had a kerosene cook stove there. And when people came to the suppers, they'd usually come down between the two buildings and come in the back door.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was so you could walk. It was a good path down that way. Usually the children came to Sunday school that way, but instead of going through the sanctuary and down the steps. The place where we had the fellowship hall was just a big, dark, dirty place. And where
Is there bare dirt and stuff like that around?
well, no, the kitchen hadn't been dug out. For many nights, men would go home and eat supper and go down to church, and with jackhammers took the rock out. Where the kitchen was all rock.
Oh.
It was an awful job. But Carl Craig and Jack Cameron and Jess Snakenberg supervised the remodeling. We had all three of them, and the men really worked.
And they had to haul all that dirt up by hand on the steps. Huh?
Well, they took it out that door to the side.
The back,
back.
The back door in the basement.
The one between the buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when they had the kitchen, the rocks all out and it shaped up, and everything ready to finish, well, the tile had to be put down. So the junior matron said, we'll do the tile if you'll mark it. So Jack Cameron and Jack Woody marked off all the basement, and we put in, all the women on their knees put in all of that tile, except that the men did the steps and the bathrooms. And no, we all had sore knees. But it was fun. We worked together and did it. And after we had it finished, of course, we had to pay for it. So we did dinners for the Lions Club and different groups. And we put on a lot of dinners. And also, every spring in May, we put on what we called the May breakfast. That was not anything we made money on. But we invited all the Methodists from the Dalles to Stevenson, and we would have the basement completely full of Methodist women. And
what kind of numbers were we talking about? Now, were there a dozen, 2 dozen?
oh my, how many people can you put in that basement?
They were just completely full?
It was completely full.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, we had people from the Lyle, the Dalles, Stevenson, across the river. Oh, the parsonage was where the grass spot is.
Oh.
And then Coburgs were where the parking lot is. And do you know we could have bought that for less than $2,300 one time?
Wow.
It just, every time I think of that, I could just kick us. Well, this is a Lois Gatchell story. Too bad you don't have Lois Gatchell, because she could tell you everything about it. But apparently, it was when they were putting the new sanctuary on, and they still had scaffolding and everything there, and the minister was up giving a big speech, and there were a lot of people around, and there was water down below. It'd been raining, and somehow he fell into that.
I mean, it was actually...
You see, there was a Japanese church there, and Bessie's mother always attended that. And Lil's father did, and Ruth Akiyama's father did. And then there was Mrs. Iwatsuki, who was very instrumental in the Japanese Methodist Church. And they met on Sunday afternoons for years after we came here. Now, I can't tell you the whole story about the Izumi room and all that, but the Japanese contributed to that. No, the screen went in after that.
Okay.
Yeah. I was trying to think who was here when that went up, and I can't quite remember. But there was controversy about it. That was something that Dick Duckwall kind of wanted. And everybody was a little bit mad because it wasn't too long after that he and Vanette pulled out. And so I don't know. I wasn't really in on that too much. But I do know that Everett Mooney is the one who built it.
Yeah. The story we heard is that there was a rather plump organist.
Eleanor Baker.
And people didn't like seeing her sit there.
But she got pretty lively at times. Eleanor could really jazz it up.
Yeah. Oh, really? I would think that would be entertaining.
Well, it was.
People wanted to put a screen up. So.
Well, I think it was Dick and Vanette wanted that, and very few people wanted it. It was kind of a controversial thing, yeah, because most of us thought that was just something we didn't need. And Eleanor was a good organist, but she was big, and she didn't sit still on the bench completely. Cloris Brownell was the choir director when we came here. And, you know, up where you stand, well, they would be up clear to the window. There were times when there were 20 and 30 people in the choir.
Wow.
It was really something to hear them sing.
Yeah.
Johnny Duckwall stuttered so, but he could sing, and he's always sang in the choir.
Really?
Yeah.
He must have stopped before we came because I don't remember him singing in the choir. But
Yeah, he had stopped before then. No, Johnny sang in the choir, and Dick did. Yeah.
Wow. And it looks like, in looking through the documentation and the pictures, that apparently his dad's name was John Duckwall.
Yes.
And he seems to be one of the founding fathers of the church in some ways because he was involved for decades.
He was kind of a dictator.
He was more of a dictator.
And he was the one who said we didn't need the parking lot. I wasn't going to tell you that, but he was. And the rest of us couldn't see it, but we didn't have the money to buy it, so.
Yeah. Well, you didn't know what cars are going to become either.
No.
Yeah.
And, well, it would have been nice for the church just to have owned that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and we had a very active MYF. Charles, I thought it would be in the mail today. Charles was going to send information about that. He was the conference president and traveled all over the conference. Yeah, and he was supposed to have gotten it. Of course, I don't have email. I should have had your email address and had him send it to you, but maybe he'll get here tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah.
If he does, give me a call and I'll come over and pick it up.
Because he said he would write up something about that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's nice.
No, he was busy traveling all around the district and places.
You remember the Wilds, don't you?
Oh, yes. And
I always liked that.
oh, I did too. And she did a lot with the young people, and they did with the young couples and young adults. Yep. Yeah, we were very fond of them. And actually, he came to see me right after I moved in here.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was so pleased.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we always thought a lot of the Kerrs. And,
Well, Lee was awfully involved in the church. I know he taught Sunday school for years.
yeah, he and there were times when we had 18 to 20 men and women in the adult class. And one time Irv Johnson said, this was after he was married the second time, he says, I wish I'd had this class when I was young. I could have avoided a lot of mistakes. Yeah.
How many years did Lee teach the adult Sunday school?
Oh, I don't know. Before that, he had the MYF. Between him, there was Don Barkley taught a little bit, and then Herman and Lee taught the adult class for years. He always enjoyed doing that. He spent hours studying.
Did he?
Yeah.
Yes.
You see, Lee grew up where they had no church.
Oh.
And his first church experience was when he went to college. Now, Herman Gerhardt designed the parsonage and supervised the building of it. And Burl and I were on the committee, and all the time we fought for more closets, but we didn't win out, as you can know by looking at it. And they insisted we've got to have a big living room. Well, that's fine, but you needed closets. And Burl and I could not convince them of that.